Hi, and welcome back. I've got Lillian Benrubi. Welcome, Lillian.
Hi, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled to have you back. And I want to jump right into my first question, which is, what is loving yourself really all about?
Sure. Okay. So, Iris, when we talk about the word love, or when we talk about, people that we love in our lives, whether it be our partner, our grandmother, our children, whoever it might be, we immediately come up with these images, these thoughts, these feelings. Our bodies will soften, our voice will soften, we'll speak slower, more gently. We hear the sounds of loving kindness through, the sounds of our loved one's voice. And so we immediately know what that is all about, right? We know it in our bodies, we know it in our hearts, we know it in our feelings, right? But, when we talk about self-love, um, we don't automatically know what that really is all about. So if we have practiced it in our lives, or we've had it modeled in our lives, then, we know how to respond to ourselves in times that we need that kind of loving kindness. But when I mention the words self-love, in my practice, I immediately see people stop to kind of scan to, take stock of where they are in relationship to that, right? And there are lots of people who just immediately know. I mean, they just have that gut response, that is a missing in their lives. So self-love is no different than loving somebody else in your life that you love dearly, right? And you love them through the lenses of gentle kindness, compassion, loving, nurturing ways. So what I mean by this is that, when we've grown up, we've largely developed a sense of self through the interpretations of others, right? Especially when we're really little. We're very dependent on our caregivers giving us feedback around, how we are in relationship to them, in relationship to the world. So, if we're in a particularly bad mood, or we have a stomach ache and we react in a not very nice way, all depending on how our caregivers in the world outside of us react to us, we get a sense of self. Oh, that was really bad. I was really bad when I did that. Or, oh, I could be punished. I could be left alone, or any of that sort of stuff. So we start to develop a sense of self through the interpretations of others. And sometimes those are harsh interpretations. They're critical interpretations. So we'll adopt those interpretations about ourselves unconsciously, not even to our awareness, right? Because we're really unconscious when we're really little. Sometimes those interpretations or those feedback, that feedback is missing. So now we're left to our own devices to try and figure that out, right? So, I'm just going to be sort of summarizing it a little bit in the beginning, and we can go into more detail as we go along in this interview. But what was I saying just now? I was talking about, so the interpretation. So now we get an opportunity and a chance to really create an interpretation of ourselves through our own knowing and through our own inner truth, rather than what the outside world has interpreted for us, which is largely based on their own reactions to us anyways, right? It's not who we truly are. So, I can give you an example, I guess, of a few clients, but we'll start with one. A client that came into my practice after her husband had an affair. Okay. So after, several sessions in talking to this client, one of the things that she brought up was these parts of herself. She talked about the part of herself that, is very gentle and loving and patient, and, wants to create something new in her relationship with her husband, who can be compassionate and understanding as to, this blip in their relationship. But she was also talking about this other part of herself, the very critical part of herself that is putting her down for sitting and waiting for him to come around and to choose the relationship. Things that she would say to herself is that she's being an idiot, that she's being a doormat, that, she's being taken advantage of or being taken for granted. And so there's these two parts of her that are duking it out and battling all the time. And, after so much time, she's exhausted. right? Some of the other things that she was talking about, because her husband had an affair with a younger woman and they were in their late 40s, was that, she was saying, I'm looking in the mirror and I'm looking at how tired I look, and I haven't been able to work out for so long because I hurt my back, so I'm gaining weight. And so she's starting to assess herself from a very sort of external perspective and feeling as though that she's not good enough because she's not young enough, right? Because he had an affair with a younger woman. So, with all this talk, her energy level is diminishing, right? She's exhausted. She's feeling terrible about herself. She's, feeling kind of helpless and hopeless around her relationship, helpless and hopeless around herself. And so she doesn't have a great deal to offer herself, let alone her relationship in terms of its repair, right? So one of the things that we were talking about, which is one of the gifts that I'll be offering, is how to kind of negotiate between these two parts, because both of these parts want something, right? And they're talking to her. So the important thing, or the critical thing here to remember, is that these parts are not us. They're not all of us. They're just parts of us, right? But they're talking to the higher part of ourselves. And they're asking us to pay attention to what it is that they need. So when we listen to the critical part of herself, the critical part of herself really just needs to feel safe and secure. And that's all the critical part of ourselves really wants. It's trying to protect us, right? So it's saying to her, stop being an idiot, leave the relationship, let him know how it really is, and all of this sort of stuff. So it's trying to protect her from all of the things that she's afraid of, that she's being taken for granted and being stepped on and so on and so forth, or ignored. The other part of her, right, is the part of her that knows that with love, with time, with patience, and so on and so forth, that it is quite possible that this relationship can be repaired, right? And so this part of her wants to give the relationship a chance because her husband means a lot to her. She has 2 kids, her family means a lot to her, and she still has this vision for them, right? So part of the practice is being able to hover above these 2 parts and really kind of listen to these 2 parts as if they were 2 kids duking it out and trying to get each other to hear one another, right? And soften the schism between these 2 and give these 2 parts what they need.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that we start off at a very young age, really defining ourselves through other people's eyes.
Yes.
And often it can be critical eyes, and that we internalize as, I'm being bad, I'm not good enough, I'm too old, I'm too heavy, I look too tired. And that you're saying there's more than one part. That's the critical part. And with this client, there was the other part that was saying, we'll give it a chance, you could make it into something really great. So how do those parts fit into self-love?
So self-love, again, is really about approaching ourselves through the lenses of gentle kindness, right? Compassion, understanding, patience, all of the things that this loving part of herself wants to approach her husband with. She gets to turn that around and shift it and have it look at herself, right? So when she's hearing this critical part of herself, that gentle part of herself gets to look at this critical part of itself, of herself, with that gentle, loving kindness, understanding that this critical part of herself really just wants to be heard, wants to be safe, wants to be protected, wants to know that all of her is doing the right thing, right? So when we hear that through those lenses, what we're saying, to this critical part of ourselves is, wow, thank you so much, for caring so much about me, that, that you want me to be, you want me to be happy, you want me to feel safe and secure, but I've got this. Right. And I need you to also hear this other part of me. I've got this. Right. I won't allow myself to be a doormat. I won't allow myself to, be taken for granted, and I need you to come along with me and hold my hand and watch me, and trust me, because there's the bigger vision, right? It's not in the immediate now. And the other pieces are also being able to talk to it in terms of, I'm not unsafe. Right. and that really ultimately I've got this, and I'm making sure that I'm also safe and secure at the same time as thinking about the bigger vision, the larger picture, and that is a future with our family being intact.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that that part of us that is critical is there to keep us safe and to protect us. And you're asking to bring in what I call the adult,
Mm-hmm.
able to keep us safe, that
Mm-hmm.
is able to maybe step out of that part and be able to look at ourselves with gentle kindness, to
Mm-hmm.
be able to create the future not from a place of fear, which is where the critical part is coming from,
Mm-hmm.
but from a place of love. Is that
Yeah,
all right?
absolutely. Absolutely. And, just in terms of, having relationships with others, specifically in intimate relationships, when we treat ourselves through those lenses, when we look at ourselves through those lenses, what we're doing is actually replenishing energy. Right? We're getting energy, we're getting vitality, we're feeling good about ourselves. And so, we are able, we have more resources to draw from when we're in a crisis or when we're in a difficult situation. So, if you can just imagine approaching somebody with self-hatred, what that could feel like for somebody else. I mean, we intuitively pick up, from one another, whatever energy is going on for each other. So if we're picking up self-hatred from somebody else, there's just something that's not flowing. There's something that's amiss, right? And if we're not a very developed human being, then, we'll start to kind of pick up that hatred, or that dislike, or we may want to kind of pull ourselves away from that because it just doesn't feel good, right? So it actually separates us. It serves to separate us instead of serving to bring us closer together, right? When we approach somebody, our partners or anybody, that sort of thing, with really being good with ourselves, right? They get to enjoy that energy, and then they're drawn closer to it, and they want it. They want to be part of it. It's compelling. It brings us forward, right?
That was going to be my next question. So, how does this self love, what does it have to do with attracting a man who's going to love you for who you are and is going to stick around?
Well, I mean, if, we're feeling really good about ourselves, then, we're being funny, we're being energetic, we're being engaged, we're curious about him, we're responding to him, he's getting the best of us. And that is the compelling feature, right? Like when we're around somebody, we want to be with them because there's something we want, right? There's something that makes us feel good. So when somebody feels good about themselves, we feel good about ourselves. Sometimes you get the flip side and it's, we're mirroring. So we're kind of going, oh my God, she feels so good about herself. Then I'm feeling so crappy about myself. So it might highlight the fact that I'm feeling crappy about myself. But nonetheless, them feeling crappy about themselves is not going to have us drawn towards them. Right? So we get to create something in this, sort of this interaction between us and them through how we feel about ourselves and how we treat ourselves. Right?
All right. So, for people who are watching who recognize that they may not be there, whatever there is in terms of self love, and I'm going to suggest that we're all someplace on that continuum to self love. If they want to know how to take that next step to truly love themselves, what would you suggest that they do?
Okay. So, I have a worksheet actually that I can provide. Maybe I will do that. And it's a series of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 or 7 questions, right? That really ask you to kind of go inward and imagine how you are with somebody who matters to you. Right. So, some of the questions, I'm just going to read off of it a little bit. What do we say about someone or a pet we love or care for? So we talk, we think about what do we say about them, right? And so this is an opportunity to reflect about what do you say about yourself, right? And how does that compare, in the world of love, right? And self-love. What do we say to this person we love or care for if they're going through a rough time or they're upset about something that happened? We're just tired or stressed. What are some of the things we say to them or do for them that have them feel better? Because often we forget that we're a human being too, you know, and that we have these needs. And if we don't have somebody who's available to us immediately, who can pick up on what we need and who are nurturing by nature, then we need to start doing those things for ourselves, right? So if we're, going through any of this or feeling any of this, what do we get to do for ourselves that has us feel better? And it may simply also be not just doing stuff for ourselves alone. It could just be reaching out to somebody and saying, hey, I need to spend some time with you, or, would you be willing to come over and, just, help me clean up? Like I used to have a friend, I don't know if you know Natalie, you know Natalie Iris, right? I mean, she would come over, and she wouldn't come over very often because she lives far away. But as soon as she got here, she'd be in my kitchen cleaning up. She'd be out in my garden cleaning up, right? And this is just her nurturing way. Right? So it's great to have that, but when we don't have it immediately available to us, we can imagine what that person would do and start doing it for ourselves.
I love what you talked about, because it's so much easier for us most of the time to be able to be gentle and kind with another. Mm-hmm. And you're really able through these questions to bring the contrast of what we tend to say to others and have that be our role model of what's possible to be saying to ourselves.
Absolutely. And I think, it's a compounding effect, right? Like every little bit that we do for ourselves compounds, like it just adds up. And we start to kind of notice that we value ourselves, right? And that value gets, taken in through our bodies and through our souls, and our minds are learning something different, and that is that we take ourselves seriously. We don't so desperately need somebody else to.
All right, so let's jump into my next question for you, which is, how does this self-love, which has us attract someone who loves us for ourselves, what's the key to having love last?
Got it. It's a big question. So really, it's a practice, right? It's no different than any other kind of practice that you might have with your partner. For instance, if you were to regularly, go out for walks in nature, right? I mean, it offers something, some time in the quiet space, in the peaceful space, some time away from the pace of life. It's no different than, let's say, a practice of going out for coffee together every Sunday morning, or, a practice of sitting down at the dinner table, and instead of being engaged in any sort of external stimulation, but just looking at each other in each other's eyes and connecting. Like those are practices that are necessary in order to sustain connection, right? And to really allow each other to go deeply and see one another and develop that level of intimacy that that makes this particular relationship special and separate from all other relationships in the world, right? So when we are practicing self-love in relationship, what we're doing is taking care of ourselves while the other person hopefully is taking care of themselves as well. So we're not, one of the features is that we're not so dependent on one another to fulfill that need. So we're not, it's, one of the things that I do with my clients is, have this sort of Venn diagram. Is it called a Venn diagram? Yeah. So, the two circles, and then there's the part that overlaps, right? The two circles are the individuals, but there's this part that overlaps that's just their relationship and only their sacred relationship, separate from everybody else. And what they deposit into that overlap, right, is this bag of gold that they get to draw from when they need it. Right? So as they're taking care of themselves, they're really depositing into this bag, right? So that when they're not able to, let's say somebody falls ill, or, somebody's having, a crisis in their life, somebody in their life is ill and they're having to spend a lot of time with them, or they're spending a lot of energy, the two of them get to kind of pull from this bag, right? And support one another. I'm trying to remember what the question was.
Yeah. So what's the key to making it last? You've attracted this man through your own self-love.
Yes.
That really recognizes you and loves you for who you are. What's the key to making it last?
Yeah. I think the other piece also is that, when we're in relationship and we're noticing another partner do something that values them we immediately value them at the same time, right? We get to see how special that really is, that somebody can actually value themselves, right? We see gold, right? And so we're attracted to that intuitively, right? And I guess the other piece around self-love as well is being able to sit with the difficulties in our relationship. If we care for ourselves, then we can be patient through the periods of times that there's difficulty in our relationships, and we're less reactive and more responsive. And so by reactive, we're not immediately trying to get our needs met all the time when the other person is not available or going through something, but we're actually able to respond to them and respond to ourselves and take care of ourselves during this period of time.
So what I'm hearing, Lillian, is that as we respond to our partners, especially in moments of difficulty, and respond in a way from gentle kindness and responding to ourselves from gentle kindness, that we continue to drop into that bag of gold.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have the resources, right? We're not so, it's like having, only so much limited food, and somebody who you love or you feel sorry for is asking for a nibble of your food. You give them a bun, and after 2 bites, you pull it back because you just don't have that abundance. Right. And so what does that create when you pull it back from somebody who's really starving and hungry? Right. So when we take care of ourselves, really what we're doing is filling up our sack of resources. We're becoming abundant so that in times of need in a relationship, we're able to give because we've got a lot to give, right?
Yeah, so it's really learning how to fill our own sack of gold so we have more to give the relationship.
Absolutely. And the more we fill our sack of gold, the more that person wants to give more of their own sack of gold. And, all of a sudden we've got this like overflowing sack, and we've got more than what we need, which is where we always want to be in any area of our lives, right?
All right, so I think that this is a really great segue into, you've got a special offer for our viewers. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, so the gift basically is an MP3 on how to negotiate between these parts of ourselves, right? So there's always going to be this critical part, the inner critic, or what some people refer to as the committee, because it feels like there's just that many more voices talking. But just to be able to negotiate between parts of ourselves, so to be able to access the loving kindness part that can negotiate with the critical part of ourselves and kind of fuse together so that we're not depleting ourselves of energy, hearing those awful voices all the time, and ultimately just feeling better about ourselves. So it's an MP3 just to be able to help us navigate through those, to access those parts. And then the other piece that I'll add is the self-love questionnaire, so that people can sit with themselves and really take stock of where they're at and start incorporating some practices that will have that sack overflow.
And I love that you talked about the committee, because often it can feel like we're crazy because we've got all these parts talking.
Yes.
What you're offering us is a way to integrate all those parts, that all of those parts are really important parts of who we are. But it's just when they're separate, and then when they take over is when we have that criticism, that discomfort, and you're offering us a way to integrate that piece, but also to have the lens of gentle kindness towards ourselves, so that we can be more gentle with ourselves, so that we can love ourselves more, so that we can attract a man who loves us for who we are, and so that we can learn how to make a relationship last.
Absolutely. And the bonus piece is that if we are being loving, gentle, and kind to ourselves, we are just naturally going to be loving, kind, and gentle towards others. If we can't do that for ourselves, there's going to be times where we're not going to be that for others, right? And that's another piece in terms of being able to create a lasting relationship.
And with that, sister, thank you so much for the time that you've given us. Thank you for the free offer, the 2 free offers you've given our viewers, for the difference that you make in the world and that you make in my world.
Aw, thank you. I love you.